Blessed love and peace in Rastafari. This is a joint, and I mentioned before the intentionality. I mentioned the intention of focusing on solutions. So this joint is somewhat solution, but increasingly insight, something that is recently learned, made aware, further understood. So it is shared for those who are wrestling with similar challenges, to have similar perspective, insight, understanding, to find solutions accordingly. And it pertains to the cringe TMI type teens. So to provide some focus in this joint, and with the interest of making it as concise as appropriate, I share these joints as a guidance joint. The power of middle-age celibacy, the power of teenage virginity, the power of the Illuminati. What's it? Yeah, the power of the Illuminati. Oh, the power of Illuminati manipulation. That's what it is. The power of Illuminati manipulation and the power of illumined woman nation. So again, the power of middle-age celibacy, the power of teenage virginity, the power of Illuminati manipulation, the power of illuminated woman nation. So consideration is, particularly for a man who is middle-aged and celibate, who abstains, who withholds his seed from being expelled, who is able to retain his seed, maintain sexual discipline, particularly for brethren who are unmarried, practicing that discipline. Remembering of something I'm supposed to do at this moment. There's accumulation of power, strength, life force, and so it's formidable. That's physically, but also mentally and spiritually, and it's actually it's almost unwieldy as it continues. So temptation continues. There's always temptation, but there are basically two paths, two preliminary paths, or two main paths for such brethren. And by the power, I'm talking about, again, physical power, strength, and brethren know that from young age. Once a brethren expends the seed, it's very evident and very obvious that the brethren becomes physically weaker, at least in the immediate term. And when he withholds and it retains the seed, there's this increasing strength. So brethren know that. But mentally, there's a clearness of mind that helps to address other things in his life, to further heal other practices within his life. And in that, the benefits are compounded. It just it becomes a multiplying effect of addressing what his path is, what his occupation is, what his relationship with others are, being able to see the truth within others, that lies within others, being able to be balanced, patient, and study, learn further and further and further when that energy, that heightened energy and strength, is applied in that way, and there's increasing motivation to do that, and all continual temptation. But when a brother is able to stay on that path of discipline and celibacy, mentally, it's scary how strong mentally brethren become. We can talk about telepathy. We can talk about understanding the secrets. We can talk about revelation. We can talk about spiritual guidance, communication from the Most High Elohim, through the pretenses of the dreams, through the pretenses of metaphors, but also directly. It just goes higher and higher and higher. So that's real, and that is cultivated when the brethren practices the discipline of celibacy, of retaining of having disciplined thoughts concerning women, respectful and further, and continually tempted as well. So when a brethren is practicing that discipline, again, the two paths. One path is to further commit towards chastity, and that, well, okay, so I'm using two terms that are appropriate to distinguish. So when I speak just a moment ago about celibacy, I'm talking about chastity. The notion of chastity is only having sex within marriage. And when a brother is not married, not having sex at all, that is celibacy. Oftentimes when somebody is practicing celibacy, there's a certain presumption or oftentimes it's perceived or presumed in a permanent sense, meaning like he's taken a vow of celibacy that he's going to practice that for the rest of his life. And that's not necessarily the case. Celibacy can be just for a year or 2 years. So anyways, but just for the distinction of terms, celibacy is no sex at all. Chastity is sex only with a man's wife. So that's the thing. And so when I'm talking about the accumulation of the power, I'm talking about a brother practicing celibacy. And then, but it may not necessarily be for it might not be in the context of a lifelong vow of celibacy. It often is, like within Buddhism, Christianity, and other traditions. There's a vow that's actually taken, but it can be just a discipline until being married. So, and that's what I'm getting to, because in the path of celibacy, either the brethren can take the one path towards further celibacy and leaving the household life, not leaving the prospect of being a husband, leaving the prospect of being a father, and that leading that kind of regular normal life, and instead being a lifelong celibate. That's one pathway. The other pathway is being a father, being married, being married, being a father, and eventually having sexual intercourse with his wife for the purposes particularly of procreation. So those are the two paths that a brother, particularly at middle age, has the decision of progressing within. So within the path of quote unquote pure celibacy or categorical celibacy, the continual temptations even then, and even whilst I abstain from making that vow, because in our practice, in our spiritual discipline, we are commanded to be married and have children, to bring life into this earth, into this earthly realm, and teach our children how to walk righteously within this life, within this earthly realm. So, and we are guided to be chaste, to be celibate until we are married. So that's that. So for those who do practice the celibacy, this continuing temptation, the temptation may be less in the respect of sexual temptation from women, or even it may not be sexual at all. It might be further towards for other types of corruption, in terms of enslaving others, manipulating others, impoverishing others, gaining material riches, gaining military power, or other methodologies of applying that energy and mental strength and further. So in that path of the celibate, there are basically two subpaths. One subpath is to withdraw significantly from society, because any connection, any attachment with the material experience, with the material realm, and particularly the systems through which the materials are provided, food, shelter, clothing, supplies, everything. all of that, those attachments are susceptibility towards corruption, and utilizing the heightened powers that a brother has from the celibacy, from retaining his life force, towards becoming corrupt. So for those who are genuinely altruistic, the subpath for the celibate is to withdraw physically from society, from convention, to go into the hills, to go to the cave, to go into the forest, and just to be different, and just be distant, and independent and solitude. Minimal engagement. There's always the necessity of some type of relationship and interaction, but even then, it's the beggar's bowl. It's only receiving what people offer. It's not wheeling and dealing and making power broking, whatever else. It's withdrawing, knowing the power that one wields, and knowing the pain that is caused at any slight indiscretion. So that subpath is, again, you don't know their names. You don't know who they are. They're not celebrities. They're not the big name going on tours and talks and everything else like that. You don't know who them is. They can be homeless, the cats that you look over and piss on. So that's them brethren right there. Power, power. So that's that. Now for the subpath of those who maintain attachments to the materiality, again, there's further tendency, further actuality, further susceptibility towards corruption. And again, it might not necessarily be sexual. It wouldn't be sexual in terms of the expelling of the sea, because that would depower the brethren. But the corruptions manifest in other ways. Again, enslaving others, gaining power, manipulation, and additionally, that's where we get into the Illuminati type of stuff, cultures, and obviously not all Illuminati. Presumably, I have less earthly knowledge about or experience with Illuminati per se, but not all Illuminati are actually celibate, and further, to my modest knowledge. But for those in that subpath who can stay celibate and stay gaining that energy and insight, but utilize it or even slightly in further corrupt ways, just because to secure shelter, to secure food, there's the necessity of negotiating, and if one is accepting the precepts of ownership, and additionally then, oh, wait a minute, that's where a lot of that that appetite for materiality may be endeavored in an attempt of experiencing some type of appeasement or otherwise. So if all those frustrations, and additionally are abstained from being released through a healthy relationship with a woman and sexual intercourse, then there's that hungriness and enslaving others, manipulating others, annihilating others, and depriving others of knowledge, depriving others of food, depriving others of respect and otherwise. So that's the susceptibility of the celibate path, and part of the element also is that it's unsustainable. It doesn't perpetuate itself naturally, organically. So it requires some type of subjugation upon others. And as the body gets further feeble and the mind continues to get stronger, and further powerful in terms of strategy and knowledge and manipulation, recalling information, knowing the dirt on others and utilizing that for manipulation, the body gets weaker, so there's a further fear and a further dependency upon the security provided from others, and then the pretenses of manipulation to secure that security. That's the susceptibility of those on the celibate path, but on the subpath of continuing attachment within the conventional systems. So that's that. Now, in the path of those who choose, who are guided and commanded into the household path, who may be celibate for a period, who may be celibate for a certain duration, a certain length of time, but are continually endeavor to be married. Then there are two subpaths again. Well, Yeah, well, it's a different type of subpath. So, um, in that path of endeavoring marriage and being married, there's obviously attachment to society and convention. Uh, all right, I'm getting a little bit enveloped in the words at the moment, so I'm going to work further to concentrate and succinctify. So, for brethren, middle aged brethren particularly, who have some knowledge about the world, knowledge about systems, who are practicing celibacy, who gain the strength from that celibacy, um, and who endeavor marriage with a woman, and family and children. There's again continuing temptation, continuing susceptibility, um, susceptibility towards corruption, and causing further harm. So it's tenacious, because that's part of the nature of life. So this is the point of what I'm sharing at the moment in this recording. And from this point, I'm speaking from personal experience, and personal learning. So, as a middle-aged man who practices celibacy and chastity for numerous years, um, this is what is experienced. Again, heightened strength, physically, mentally, spiritually, and continually tempted, continual susceptibility towards uh, the attraction and the seduction of women. And so this is some insight concerning the nature of that seduction, what some of um, the less susceptible things are, and what some of the further vulnerable experiences are. And again, this is shared for the well-being of all beings, because it affects everybody. So when a middle-aged man who has some type of conscientiousness and intentionality of righteousness is practicing celibacy and gains that strength, to be honest, women first. The brother is different from convention. So um, all the things that the games and everything else that people play are less applicable. There's just a knowledge about the futility of the games. There's less concern about ego, and I'm saying this in kind of like a universal thing, and this is not necessarily a universal thing, because a lot of brethren practice celibacy in different ways and have different spiritual proclivities or spiritual inclinations and perspectives. So some brethren may still be caught up in games and everything else, but I'm speaking from a personal experience. There is a differentiation, and there's less patience for the games, the gaming of within society of women, and there's less reliance upon ego as well, and less of the insecurities and the overcompensations of looking for a woman for validation, self-validation, self-value, to get cred from other brethren or sisterin or whatever else. What is observed is that adult women, how do I put this? Young young adult women, to be honest, there's less of a, I won't say less, I'll say there's further hesitancy of involvement with adult women. And by adult, I'm talking about 20s, 30s, thereabouts, who are further commensurate of age with a middle-aged man. There's further hesitancy of committing an involvement because numerous reasons. One, a woman by the age of 20s and 30s becomes increasingly set in her ways. She's conditioned, she's trained, she's taught, she's socialized to be in a certain way, to have certain expectations, to utilize her sexual prowess in certain ways in interacting with a man. And there's a lot of predatoriness within that as well. And that conditioning is essentially, eventually, established through the norms of the men around her, whether that's family, whether it's the tradition, whether it's the society. So she's practicing and perceiving in those norms. And so it can be difficult for a woman conditioned in such a way to understand readily, immediately, genuinely the ways of a man who is, we can utilize the word pious or piety, because oftentimes he seemed and perceived simply as being very slick, very sly, just having extreme game or whatever else, and having difficulty to understand the rationale of what he communicates, what he says, what he's doing, what he's thinking. But the point here is that a woman who's in her 20s and 30s tends to be set in her ways. It's difficult for her to change significantly, particularly to accommodate a man who is practicing a conscientious path. It's not impossible, but it's challenging, and particularly to just identify a woman just from face value, even from observing through internet and additionally through the pretenses and facades. It's difficult to discern what woman may be further receptive, amenable, inclined, inspired, motivated to learn a path that is different than what she learns before. What is observed is that many women, even at a young age, are very conditioned to be with a certain type of man. Within a Western context, it's when a girl is raised in a certain school environment, and additionally, and is provided with a certain media guidance in terms of films and TV and social media. There's a norm. There's like a prototype of a man that she is guided to be with. How to accommodate a certain that type of man, and there's like epitome. And if it's communicated to her through teachers and otherwise that she's not going to get the epitome, then it's like further lesser versions of that epitome. And once a woman gets experience and learns things and learns truth within herself that are different from that epitome, it can still be very difficult for her to find comfort and a sense of home with something different than that prototype, because it's very much entrenched, ingrained within her upbringing for years and years and years. And there can be a man who can just charm her charisma, this and the other, open her up to something completely different. But oftentimes in that scenario, he seduces her. He has sex with her, and thus he you can say there's defilement mutually, but she might see things differently. She might have an adjusted perspective in terms of the ideal and even truth within herself. But at the same time, first of all, she loves that dude. And so she's committed to that dude, regardless of what he does and otherwise. And that influences her relationship with anybody else after that. So same thing with men, but somewhat different way. Point here is that by the time a woman becomes a woman in her 20s and 30s, she's conditioned, she's set, and it can be difficult for her to jump, and it can be unfair for a man to expect her to jump, because women are way beyond my understanding. There's so many things. There's an infinity that I have yet to learn about women that I in this life will never learn about women. One thing that I observe is one, women have much further tremendous powers in many ways than men. But one of the vulnerabilities that I observe is the difficulty of women in apologizing for doing things that are actually harmful. And even then, like there's so many layers of reasons why women do things. That a man might fault her for doing something at a certain level, when in actuality, like this is what the rationale behind it. She's not going to say that often. Oftentimes she's precluded from saying it because there's so many unspoken things, and it's very difficult because a woman has powers, but at the same time she also is bound by certain things that she can't speak of as either. And a man simply has to understand and observe and be patient and work on the communication. So my point here is saying part of that applies to the difficulty a woman has in changing her ways after being 20s or 30s, because there's something that she forsakes in her life in making those changes, even when wanting to. And oftentimes what is forsaken is actually the prospect of relationship with the man that she has the interest in, unbeknownst to him in certain ways. So the point is just that it's observed that the difficulty women. It's not impossible. It is possible, but it takes some doing. It takes effort. It takes patience on a man. It takes constancy, cultivating trust, and regularity, routine and consistency to facilitate that bridge. So and it can be rather it's a big ask for a woman. So it's beneficial for men to be mindful of that. So anyways, that's one of the challenges, because the way I live particularly is rather different than how the world lives. So that's one element. Another element is women who are inclined, adult women, 20s and 30s, are very empowered, quote unquote, within postmodern Western society. There's so many motivations for a woman to be single, to wield her sexual prowess for the purposes of influence, seduction, manipulation, and gaining economic compensation for that through job salaries, through entrepreneurship or otherwise. And we can talk about OnlyFans, pornography, and everything else like that. But the sexuality of women is exploited in so many ways, whether she's blatantly naked or otherwise. So, but there's just so much motivation. There's so much incentive for women to do that and not to be married, not to be committed, to continually look for something further lucrative. That it's difficult to even broker such a conversation and discussion about marriage and commitment, and additionally with a woman accordingly, particularly when meeting a woman out of the blue, outside of a shared traditional or community experience at a young age where people know each other's families and otherwise. So again, for adult women in her 20s and 30s, difficult to change her ways. Second is motivated not to get married. And then a third one, again, for brethren who are in a righteous path, we can talk about the age of legality. So when a woman is actually permitted or allowed or sexual intercourse is permitted with a woman, that's the age of legality. And the thing about that is that when reaching the age of legality, when a woman essentially becomes a citizen, those are equated. It's not necessarily the same thing, but those are equated generally within many nations. She also loses that innocence, that comparative innocence, in becoming a citizen. And when becoming a citizen, incurring all the guilt that exists within what that nation is doing, the blood, the atrocities, the genocide, the stealing, the the raping of peoples and the earth, and additionally, so again, that virtue of a woman within a female, once becoming a citizen of a democracy, of a republic, is significantly reduced when becoming a citizen. So that is also prohibitive for a man who's walking a righteous path. So that is another challenge. And again, the prospect of marriage involves renouncing that citizenship, and that's another huge step. And that affects relationships with her family and friends and everything that she knows before that. So that's part of the challenge. And it's also all of that, to be honest, factors into the a severe lessening of the desirability of a woman in that respect at the age of 18, who's studying at university, who is working in some kind of professional capacity or otherwise. The sexual prowess of a woman is significantly reduced. Like, well, how I'll put this, there's less allure. There's less. It's not even a matter of allure. There's less. It's not even a matter of attraction. That primal connection is lessened for a woman at that stage of life, because of the awareness of the things that she's enveloped in, the game, the corruption, the atrocities, and further, and how that factors into a prospect of marriage with such a woman, and how that woman can be expected to raise and be in partnership and raise children, and all the future compromises in terms of going to school, acquiescing to social norms, and with school and with community, and additionally, and a woman who is already involved and committed and benefiting from corrupt ways within society, it's less of a favorable prospect of being in lifelong partnership, of committing to providing for such a woman and whatever her expectations may be along those lines of material comfort, but then even further, how to raise the children, what to teach the children, with whom to socialize the children, and additionally, because of that, within the experience of a righteous man, there's less of a motivation, a primal attraction towards adult women in that respect, because of that. Now, at the same time, a man is a man, and when a man sees a woman, there's a physical attraction. And when women are presenting themselves, when women present womenselves in rather provocative, sexually provocative ways, that stimulates a man in a primal sense, and challenges him within temptation accordingly, and that might, in a short run, in a brief period, increase and challenge his discipline, and making further susceptible to making an effort or otherwise. It is less conducive. It is actually counterproductive towards cultivating healthy relationship, marriage, commitment, and further. So, but that's one of the challenges that men have to deal with accordingly. So then there is the experience, the phenomena, the relationship with women who are under the age of 18. And when looking at things on the internet, when people talk about pedophilia, and additionally, obviously, pedophilia is an atrocity. It is horrendous. It is wrong. And it is too often being done, too often being regularly done, being regularized. So that is plain simple. Now, the consideration is, at what age is it appropriate? Is it favorable? Is it permitted for a person to have sexual intercourse? The age of 18, people can focus on it, and there's certain legitimacy within that. But that's comparatively arbitrary. And it's easy to just put blinders on and say, oh, that's the legal age, that's the law. but the law is based upon baseness. So it's an inaccurate and inappropriate way of making that type of distinction. And particularly, well, I'm trying not to get into all the details of this, whatever, but it becomes very duplicitous when teenagers are hypersexualized, hyperly exploited sexually, even though there's no immediate sexual intercourse, even though there may not be any explicit nudity. There's just so much regularized sexual exploitation. So well, I'm working to focus and make this succinct. So there's a duplicity on that. So 18 is a comparatively arbitrary, and there's certain legitimacy within it, but there's a lot of duplicity and disgenuineness when utilizing that. We can look at other distinguishing factors. We can or where else to draw the line. But in actuality, there is no ultimate way of drawing the line because the premise of adulthood, the right of adulthood, is different amongst traditions. There's a comparatively somewhat universal standard of puberty, of when a woman actually menstruates and is able to have children, when a boy produces seed and has semen and is able to have children, that being a defining characteristic. But again, that happens at different ages. So. And not all communities abide by that or live by that. So even that is other than the universal standard. It is worldwide. There is that precept, but it's difficult to state that definitively and universally. So it may be a general line of consideration, and then further lines of consideration of, I think in certain countries the legal age is 16, and then it gets into the categories of whether someone under 16 can have sex with somebody else somebody who's under 18 can have sex with somebody who's under 18, and whether it's somebody who's under 18 but over 16 having sex with somebody who's under 16, and all these, it gets very complicated. And then it gets into the whole realm of the Supreme Court and the inability of the Supreme Court to actually effectively discern where to draw the lines, because the Supreme Court itself is enveloped in sexual exploitation. And further, when the Supreme Court says, and I don't even know how much this is still the relevant law, but there's a Supreme Court decision where the judge basically talks about pornography and says, well, I know it when I see it. Okay, so every time somebody's trying to make a decision about pornography, you have to ask this dude right here to get the okay. There's an absence of a uniform code to describe what the conditions are, and the same thing concerning age of consent. There can be a designation keeping the age of 18, but then also identifying the age of puberty, and then for violations therein, those violations that involve a child under the age of puberty being much further severe than the consequences for violations against a child at the age of 17 or 16. And then, all right, so the point is, and this might be Freudian or whatever, the difficulty of me addressing this, but the actuality is that when there's a considerable corruption observed within adult women who are 18 and over by the fact of being citizens, then there is the appeal, the attraction, the interest of women who are under 18, particularly because not being a citizen, not requiring her to change or let go or relinquish. Now, that might be a comparatively non-argument, because even if she's under 18, the prospect of soliciting her to not become a citizen may have the same comparable consequences in terms of her relationship with others, her family, friends, society, and additionally. But there is a distinguishing factor. But I'm just speaking from an experience of just, there's a peace. To be honest, there's a peace when talking with somebody who's, and this is my personal experience, and talking with a woman who's from another nation, who's known not to be a citizen, particularly of the United States, because of the things that the United States does. There's a sense of peace that doesn't exist when talking with a woman who's a U.S. citizen. And so in that peace, there's increasing prospect for partnership, marriage, children, and further. So there's that. Am I going to keep it with that? Okay. No, there's further for me to address here. Um, so to go back to what I begin with in terms of the power of middle-aged celibacy, the power of teenage virginity. When a man is practicing, when a middle-aged man practices that celibacy, cultivates that strength, mindfulness, um, there's less patience perhaps for the corruptions within a woman, and thus, but at the same time, there's also further attraction to the comparative innocence of a younger woman, and seeing a younger woman as an increasingly favorable and plausible marriage prospect of marriage, wife, mother of children, and additionally, also a younger woman is still learning. Generally speaking, comparatively, generally speaking, is still learning. Still has a vibrancy and an eagerness and affection to share. Is less jaded by the experiences within life, by the betrayals of men and otherwise, and further has further of a store, further of a treasure of affection and energy to devote to her husband, to her children, to teaching her children, to raising her children, and additionally. And so for a man, accordingly, there's the recognition of such a woman being an increasingly favorable prospect of marriage and being a wife. So, but obviously there are challenges with that because of laws. Now, at the same time, the age of legal consent is 18, but that's when a man and a woman. There is, according to the law, at least most recent, as I most recently am aware of, where particularly when talking about marriage, because in a righteous walk, a man is not just going to go up to a woman who's under 18 and have sex with her. If he does have an interest of marriage with her, then it's a matter of talking with her parents, and arranging and getting the approvals accordingly. And in that scenario, that's actually legal. There's permissibility for a woman under the age of 18 being married and having sex with her husband, with the sanction of her parents and further. So, and again, that's different than the 18 stronghold. But again, those who are focusing on the 18 stronghold are those who are predatory, those who are just looking at sexual conquest, and just looking at being with a woman for the purpose of having sex with her and not being committed to her, not caring for her for the rest of her life. And additionally, so as long as she's 18, blah, it can be done, whatever, as long as she's consensual, or at least as long as she's compensated sufficiently to be consensual, whoop, there it is. So to focus so hard fast on the age of 18 is actually telling of the predatoriness. So that being said, there's that. But when there is the awareness of the corruptions of the woman, and the rigidities within woman, the hardness, there is increasing affinity towards a woman who is younger, who is less has less experience of betrayal from men, who is further green in the guidance and living under the roof of her far, and still has that affection for life, and that she has to share with her husband and with her children, with her family, and the ability, propensity to learn about the ways of her husband, and to teach. Now, in that scenario also, generally speaking, when a woman has less experience, that requires a man to be further knowledgeable, to be further proactive, and to be further prepared and further disciplined. And the nature of the partnership is also different. In the Western modern society, whilst there's a certain rigidity amongst adult women, there's also less women. Adult women are further independent, further self-caring. It's unnecessary for a man to be as immediately protective and otherwise towards a woman. And there, because of that, including myself, there's a certain laziness where a man becomes accustomed to not having to think ahead of time about how to prepare, how to provide, how to accommodate, how to make comfortable a woman, and not just presume that she can do it herself, that she will do it herself, that she knows how to do it herself. And that's particularly applies to a woman who is younger, who has less experience with the world particularly. So that's something for a man to be mindful of and attentive to when approaching such partnership with particularly a younger woman. So there's that. Now, I'm getting into elements that are less comfortable, that are further personal, but at the same time, there is benefit in articulating this because it is helpful to be aware of this, and to find the solutions accordingly. So, because this provides some insight concerning how the game works, and particularly pedophilia. When a middle-aged man accumulates certain power, particularly through practice of celibacy, there is an increased draw towards a younger woman for many of the reasons that I just articulated. And even when a man practices discipline, it's involuntary, because one way of describing is how, okay, this is one way that people might be able to understand this. When it's generally understood, like when a man doesn't have sex, and he can be young and not have sex, and so people talk about being backed up. And when a man is backed up, he looks pressed, he looks stressed, he looks anxious. They say he's thirsty, he's desperate to have some kind of interaction with a woman. He can be awkward or whatever else. He could be pushy, he could be aggressive or whatever else. But those are some of the symptoms of accumulating that power and the frustrations accordingly. And in that kind of situation, a woman it's much easier for a woman to manipulate a man accordingly. When she sees that he's thirsty and he's desperate to do whatever, then she can string him along and juice him for money, purchasing food, clothing, whatever, knowing how motivated he is to be in relationship with a woman, even whether his motives are positive or negative. He still has that urge. So that thirst, particularly in the conditions that I described with a middle-aged man, becomes it is augmented, it is amplified towards a younger woman. And by younger woman, I'm talking about a woman who is younger than 18. I'm trying to not give a grocery list here. The general characteristics that I'm describing is a woman who is a young woman who is physically matured, who is menstruating, who is living in her father's house, who has, again, that a further sense of innocence. Ain't nobody 100% innocent in this life, but has a further credibility and softness and energy and vibrancy. So progressing through that awkward, the point here is that when a man abstains from having a relationship with a woman, that allure, that attraction is increased. When a man has certain discipline and conscientiousness, that attraction is comparatively modest for women who are perceived as corrupt, and it is further increased for women who are perceived as feminine, soft, innocent, and such. And the influence that a woman has, that such a woman has, is substantial. And even when a woman who has those characteristics, who has those qualities, is uninterested or is unintending to be manipulative or seductive, there's just a connection, and there's a connection, and that the man is significantly influenced by that, involuntarily influenced by that. He can be disciplined, and he can quell and direct and otherwise, but he's still influenced by that. And my point for sharing this is that even when he's disciplined, and even when the woman is not intending to be seductive and to manipulate him, other people are aware of that too, particularly the brethren I mentioned at the beginning, who are also celibate and know how the game works, and sees, oh, there's that brethren who's venturing there. Yep. You can imagine that he just met that young sister over there. Oh, it's sparking, because that's the nature of a man and a woman. Spark, regardless. And because of that, the brethren who have that knowledge, and the sisterin as well, who have that knowledge about that nature and those conditions, can manipulate those circumstances. And that's where we get into the concerns about pedophilia, of how women, as well as I'll say girls and boys, are put in positions of luring adult males into relationship, particularly inappropriate relationship, and then manipulating the men through the children. And again, there's a spectrum about how that is, from the way atrocities. We can talk about cults. We can talk about child trafficking. We can talk about parents selling out their children, and that whole kind of all types of easy to see wrongness that people still don't address. But then at the same time, there's levels of this, because we can talk about going to. I saw a video on social media about immigrants in New York City and otherwise in Mohawk Land, standing in front of storefronts, and those being described as brothels, as the red light district. And when somebody with a camera or otherwise would walk on the sidewalk, then the young sister and hurrying inside, not to be seen and not to be evidenced. And it's such a heinous, hurtful thing to see, like women just being prostituted and just being used, because it may seem like comparatively innocuous. The women seem to be fed and seem to be healthy or whatever else, but how do you think the women are going to look 6 months from now, a month from now, or a year from now, 2 years from now, when the women are perceived as not enough, or somebody else has arrived? Or it's painful. So point is that's an example of the brothels, the sex trafficking, and that's for adult women, that's for young women or otherwise. And when we see that, we can say, okay, yeah, that's we can call that out. People don't call it out enough, but we can recognize particularly easily. But that's just a further along the degree, because then it goes further. We can talk about okay, maybe not necessarily standing outside a storefront. I mean, I can talk about seeing things here where I stay at Coventry Road. Well, I've already talked about this, but well, I'll get into the further spectrum. So restaurants, cafes, where women work, and it may not necessarily be the overt kind of direct brothel type situation, but we can evidence a nuanced methodology of sexual intercourse for certain compensation, and the certain code words and the protocols and all the different buffering of who gets the money and what's the pretense and what's the reason and everything else like that. But in actuality, it's women who are buying, who are being sexually exploited for economic gain by the people who are managing that. So we can talk about universities again, where, well, without getting into the whole spiel about this, but the point is that there's a spectrum, and in these circumstances, a woman's sexuality and a girl's sexuality, and oftentimes men's sexuality and boys' sexuality, are utilized by a third party to influence, manipulate a man. Sometimes it can be a woman, but very often it's simply a man. So there's that, and a matter of being mindful of that. Being mindful also how pervasive that practice is, how normalized that practice is, how much the sexuality of young women over the age of 18, but young, 18, 19 years old, and then how the sexuality of women who are under the age of 18, models, modeling clothing, lingerie, and additionally, and to be honest, I have to pause there because I'm uncertain if there's actually a legal, if there's legal prohibition concerning underage women modeling swimsuits or lingerie. There may be, and there may be according to different nations, but that's one side note. What is recognized is how much under the age of 18 women do present women's selves in lingerie and in bathing suits, do the sexual provocative dances, twerking, and additionally, which is very attractive to men, including myself, because that's the primal nature. But that's also sexual exploitation, and legal, because particularly when a woman does it herself, or presumably does it herself through management or otherwise, and isn't necessarily gaining material compensation for that by having an IG account or TikTok or otherwise, but still she's sexually exploiting herself. She's being sexually exploited by the platform and by others, by the advertisements, and additional kinfolk who are gaining benefit from that, who are also manipulating and influencing the behavior of the men accordingly, weakening men specifically and categorically. And it's beneficial to recognize that. It's beneficial to recognize how it's very difficult to talk about this in a very succinct way, because usually when talking about something, it's a matter of talking about it from an experience of distance and observation of and even if having previously gone through it, been done with it, and so progress from it. This is one topic that is difficult. Particularly, I'm immersed within it at this moment, and wrestling to reconcile and find solution. And in that process, learning some things, observing some things, and being called to share that so that others who are also wrestling with that, which is millions and billions, to have that awareness as well. And it doesn't have to be millions and billions, but even just for brother and sister who are so inclined. And there is a further specific point, and there is some further insight that we have in mind. So I'll try to focus on just going to that. The point in the most recent joint that I share here is that is how the sexuality of young women is exploited and utilized to the detriment of the women, but also to adversely manipulate, affect the men as well. There's systemic corruption, and the intentionality of, I mean, we can look at a number of the motivations of those who do the exploitation, the third parties who do the exploitation. One is significantly just economic gain, or just gaining some material benefit by exploiting the woman, short term, long term, or whatever. That's one. Another one is weakening a man. Trying to think if there's another one to discern or to address concerning the effects concerning the woman who's being exploited. That seems to be pretty much the main motivation, is just to gain economic gain through things that are harmful for the woman, sexual exploitation. Now, in terms of the man, there seem to be two things primarily that are a motivating factor. And again, this may, for most people, this is way less of an incentive or whatever, but for others who are in the hierarchies of conventional systems, this often is a further motivation. One is just weakening, corrupting the men systemically, generally within society, and being further susceptible to other policies within society that are increasingly draconian, and restrictive, and subjugating and otherwise. And when men are already corrupted through the temptations of women, then it's easier to impose other laws and other policies and restrictions and injustices for against or upon men accordingly. So just a general weakening of men. That's another motivation. And then the third motivation is specific entrapment of men. To set up the rules of engagement in a way that either a man violates those rules, and then the hammer comes down of the laws accordingly, or is accused of violating those rules, or even being in a situation that looks as though he's violating those rules. And the hammer coming down. And this is a very delicate point to make, because it involves a certain concern and a criticism towards law enforcement. And that's challenging, because it's law enforcement's responsibility for protecting children. And there's many kinfolk in law enforcement who are very vigilant and do very much tedious, difficult, painstaking work to protect children. So we have to be mindful of that. And it's still so little. So much further is needed to protect children, to protect women, to protect men, to protect society. So there's a hesitancy in articulating criticism in this respect. However, we have to. It's necessary. So we temper it by saying what I just said at the moment, and then now saying this, because we also know within law enforcement that law enforcement is not the leadership of society. Law enforcement is a tool from the plutocracy, and so even when those who are the law enforcement, police, even prosecutors, judges, and additionally, but particularly the police and the investigators, and additionally the people who are further close to the ground, the salt of the earth, even when the intentions are genuine and want to serve and protect and like devote one's life for that purpose, even when that's the scenario, still being governed, still having an authority from the plutocracy, from not even just the politicians, but the financiers, the landowners, who are involved in cults, and additionally who are doing the exploitation, and manipulating what the law enforcement itself does, what it allows the law enforcement to do, what it allows the law enforcement to investigate, and otherwise. So that's across the board. That's sex, that's drugs, that's extortion, violence, theft, domestic, all across the board. That's the whole of society, but including within the experience of sexual exploitation, child trafficking, sex trafficking, and otherwise. So we have to be mindful of that, and we have to be very careful about how we articulate that and how we may criticize or otherwise, because it's necessary, it's prudent to discern who the actors are, who the decision makers are, accordingly. So if there seems to be a deficiency on the part of police enforcement or on the part of investigators, the fault, the predominance, the preponderance of the fault is often not on the police officer, not on the investigator, not on the chief, even not even on the prosecutor, but further guidance. We can talk about mayors, and we can talk about city managers, we can talk about city councils, and additionally, but when we get to that level, we're further talking about the anchors within that, the economic anchors within that municipality or within that government system, and the ones who are brokering the influence with the government. So point here is that amidst these conditions and amidst these methodologies of investigation, there is one of a prominent methodology for finding pedophiles is entrapment, is baiting people, where a police officer goes online and what's it called? Pretends to be a child, and then looks for an adult male who bites on that invitation. And the details of those methodologies, I have less, my knowledge of that is comparatively modest, but I'm aware of that existing through a number of specific cases. And again, it may be done with genuine intention, and there may be genuine results about finding people. But that's only one of the ways of which pedophiles act, and it's kind of like a drop here and there, and kind of a hit and miss type thing. It can be targeted or otherwise, but the concern is how that methodology is utilized to entrap certain targets, where the decision makers, the anchors, the plutocracy says, "Oh, here's a competitor. We know this competitor has some type of proclivities or interests or susceptibilities. Maybe we can arrange something where we invite that competitor into this type of situation and get as much evidence or otherwise against that competitor, to either where the competitor actually does something that's guilty, or it's enough to look bad, and either one, try to put that person on blast and have a trial and embarrass that person, and even maybe get a conviction, or threaten and coerce the person so much with that pressure to become less competitive accordingly. So that's the way the government works. That's the way the system works as well. So there's a concern regarding that, because that undermines the integrity of the genuine endeavor to stop the actual exploitation. So with that being said, and experiencing that, I'll share my personal experience, and I've already shared this recently within a multi-hour joint within recent weeks, but I'll see if I can share this, God willing, in a comparatively succinct manner in the context of what I'm sharing here today. So in my personal experience, I do practice chastity, celibacy for a number of years. And after numerous years, I experienced a relapse. And I continue to work to discern how that happens, and there's an understanding generally, but still, it's challenging. And since then, I've become increasingly aware of, or mindful of, how to regather the discipline that is healthy and strong, and particularly guiding the my attraction to women in a way that is healthy and fruitful in terms of being married with a woman, and having children, and having family. So in that process, as I described generally within the past hour, about what a man experiences when accumulating that type of strength, is increasing heightened attraction to women, but again, particularly to younger women who are recognized as increasingly fertile. What I observe within myself is how much a woman influences my thought. Even within a very brief interaction. And how that influence of thought influences my intentionalities. Whether it's, I saw her here, I met her here, let me go back there at some point. What day was that? What hour was that? Why must she have been there? And right there, for a person like myself, even just doing that is a significant change of course. Because in going to that place, now I'm immersing myself within that environment, into conversations with other people on certain topics that are increasingly of priority in that particular environment. So that has ethnic implications, cultural implications, economic, political implications. If it's a place that's comparatively liberal, whether it's comparatively of a certain ethnicity or cultural experience, then it means having further conversations with people who have those types of interests and priorities and intentionalities, ambitions. And then just being in the environment makes myself increasingly avails myself to that suggestion and influences the decisions I make otherwise. Just within the path here, it influences it accordingly, and as opposed to going to this place over here or otherwise. So that might seem slight, but again, when brethren progress towards certain stages of authority, just having a brother's ear, and having a suggestion, and planting a suggestion is increasingly lucrative. So when a woman is able to influence a man to be present in a certain place, that is actually lucrative. The degrees of which vary, obviously, case to case, man by man, otherwise. But that's part of the nature of the game, and so. And I'm susceptible to that, and that's one of the reasons why men who are in a traditional community are very mindful of public interaction, particularly outside of the community. Very extremely mindful of any type of direct interaction, even let alone conversation with a woman. First one, a woman who's otherwise unknown before that. And particularly a woman who is of another community, of another discipline, of another politic or otherwise. Watch out about touching another woman, even just shaking hands or exchanging currency or otherwise, because there's awareness of how powerful a woman is in influencing a man's mind. And postmodern society, secular society, tends not to acknowledge that, and kind of pish posh that, but it is extreme. Um, and it's significant, and uh, it's beneficial to recognize that. So when women talk about being able to wear whatever a woman wants to wear, um, there's there's a personal violation, because she's when a man who has that discipline, who's extremely impressionable to the a woman's sexual powers, and he's walking to go to the grocery store, and onto the grocery store he sees a woman who's wearing a short skirt or yoga pants, and revealing the space between her thighs, and showing her bosom, and the space between her breasts, and is showing her midriff, her belly button, and additionally, and people will say, well, he should be disciplined, he shouldn't look. That's bullshit. Um, and so that's the public realm, and there's legitimacy, there's necessity for men to be out and to do the work that's necessary in this life to do errands, to get supplies for the household, and additionally. And so, in many ways, that is, it's not as severe by any means in terms of a physical violation as rape, but it should be considered along those lines. And that's not a saying like a woman deserves to be raped, because no, it's a matter of recognizing the simple violation against a man when a woman presents herself in that way. A simpler way, an easier way many might be able to recognize that is if, when you talk about red light districts, when a woman is wearing, when a prostitute is wearing that revealing clothing, for the purposes of having sex for business, for compensation, and if she stands outside of a high school, or if she stands outside of a middle school, they'd be like, nah, that's not right. Maybe people might say that, but back in the day, people would say definitely not right. That's an example. So we can recognize the undue influence that such a woman has for a younger man under the age of 18. But the same influence the woman has the same influence over a man who's over 18. And so that calls for society to have further standards of propriety about how people present themselves. So that's one thing to consideration. And even further, to be honest, one thing that is considered, or that I shared recently, a suggestion that I shared recently, is that even when a man masturbates, that may be considered as rape. When a man, because masturbation is self-affliction. The definition that's shared in high school, when I'm in high school, is self-manipulation. But that's affliction, that's oppression, that's exploitation. And that is precipitated very often by the immodesty of women. And that it's not blaming women for anything, but it's just a matter of recognizing the cause and effect, and the unhealthy consequence in that cause and effect, and women's involvement in that cause of unhealthy effect, that harmful effect, because beyond just the physical depletion of a man's seed, his life force, there's also the emotional depression, the shame, the guilt, the listlessness, the apathy, the demotivation for healthy relationship with a woman, and additionally. And so there's the consideration I shared before about a wet dream. What if a man sees a woman and is very much disciplined or whatever, and there's a woman who presents herself and presents herself in a provocative way, to an extent that involuntarily, in the middle of the night when the man is asleep, he has an emission. That might be considered perhaps further easily as a violation against him. And again, it's not as severe as when a man physically violates a woman. But it's appropriate to recognize the violation because it influences the aggregate of conditions. And when we have that healthy relationship, the healthy presentation in the public sphere of men and women, that is conducive towards a further social health, a collective health, that does provide further protection, comfort, and safety for women accordingly. So that's part of the cause and effect. One other thing I'll say, and it's beneficial to start wrapping this up because it's almost Shabbat again. So here we are. Further consideration is that at the moment, all that being said, the actuality is that the methodology of sexual exploitation, and particularly child sex trafficking and exploitation, is so pervasive. And the susceptibilities are so pronounced that there is a rationale that purports the favorability of actually proactively patronizing less exploitative activities with women. By that I mean like pornography and other things that are unhealthy, that are unfavorable, that are hurtful, but still proactively pursuing or participating in that type of behavior, rather than becoming increasingly susceptible, involved, or enveloped, or even targeted for exploitation that is much even further harmful. And that rationale smacks of bullshit. The perception of just excusing a slighter offense for the perceived risk of a greater offense. That doesn't excuse the lighter offense. However, when it's recognized that the law of society allows for that offense itself, the exploitation, pornography, and otherwise, it's legal. And when it's very prohibitive of healthy relationship with kinfolk who are under the age of 18, kinfolk who are told how to have sex, told to have sex by teachers and society under the age of 18, who are dressing up and sexually active. When those are the norms of society, and in those norms of society, there are methodologies and systems and intentionalities of entrapment, and additionally, it becomes difficult to abstain from proactively participating within the harmful behavior that society allows, because without doing that, in being healthy and further powerful, one is further susceptible to the temptations and entrapments of behavior that is further unhealthy. Even just approaching a woman in a healthy way, in a respectful way, and talking about marriage, even talking about marriage itself, in my personal experience, is severely dangerous. There have been, when approached by a woman, and a woman communicating an interest in myself, and then myself broaching the topic of marriage, then police being called, and other types of threats, severe violent threats being made accordingly, and not making any kind of not making sexual overtures or sexual suggestions or solicitations, discussing straight up marriage, But that being further offensive, um, when those are the responses, and again, this is when meeting people outside of any like particular frame of reference of a tradition or otherwise, but when those are the conditions, when the law permits and promotes unhealthy mildly unhealthy sexual exploitation, pornography, even in certain areas, prostitution, um, uh, promiscuity, sexual intercourse between men and women who are not married, prevalent. Um, when that is permitted and promoted by the law, um, and when there are um, when the law explicitly prohibits certain types of interaction and behavior with genuine reason, but then with also uh, disgenuine boundaries and disgenuine practices, or applications of enforcement or allowances, when it gets into the murky area, but the consequences of violating the law are severe. And then when the law significantly prohibits or significantly prevents, not prohibits, but prevents, or has very high like requirements for healthy interaction in terms of the conditions for being married, and additionally, um, it becomes difficult to be proper. So in that respect. So anyways, that's a convoluted articulation of what I have to share at this moment. Very difficult, because I'm being honest. Even if I'm being somewhat coded or whatever else, I've shared tons of TMI through the past 2 decades, even just within recent weeks. So also in soliloquy format is comparatively difficult because I'm just going. Um, it can be further effective in a discussion type of scenario, question and answer, examples when it's solicited, when it's perceived as relevant. It's easier to respond to those than just me voluntarily just doing this. So, but the point is that the challenge, the difficult irony and paradox of doing something that is the appropriate, the healthy thing, the right thing to do, but it makes things much further difficult. And that when the law of the land is structured in a way that is unhealthy and very severe, and when there are systemic corruptions and manipulations amidst these conditions to avoid those severities, and it's not just a matter of avoiding punishment, because it's a matter of the harm that's caused. So the difficult paradox is the acquiescence in causing a slighter harm, full stop. All that being said, there is a better way. There are solutions. Easier said than done. In the case of marriage, it takes two to tango. So it's something that exists beyond one individual's control or volition or decision. And that's gonna be it. That's gonna be it. Yeah, that's gonna be it for the moment. All thanks and praise to the Most High Elohim. Respect and honor to all our ancestors, all our prophets, all our sages, past and present, known and unknown. Respect and honor to His Majesty Haile Selassie I and Her Majesty Wazir. Respect and support to all our progeny, from the first Siete years to the next Siete generations, Dor Vador. One heart, one mind, one blessed love supreme. With blessed love and peace in Rastafari.